Welcome to Search for Signs. My name is Gary Willing. If this information interests you, please press the like and subscribe button and press the bell for notifications.
It is May 22nd, 2020, and I hope you're having just as good a day today as you were yesterday at this very time. Now, if you weren't having a good day yesterday, let me be the first to say, hopefully you're having a better day today than you were yesterday. So, anyway, a lot of questions to get into today, so let's get on into it. And if you have a question, please feel free to post that question as a comment. That's the best way. Or you can email me directly at searchforsigns@mail.com. And since I've been mentioning this, we've had a perfect record, actually. So since we're having a perfect record, I want to keep it going. But please refrain from asking me any questions about other people's, my opinions about what other people are saying. That'd be great. Now, alrighty, let's see. First question. Was Muhammad, Jesus, Buddha just Maitreya manifesting itself as these beings? Well, Maitreya is not an itself, he's a who-self. Maitreya is in physical body. And when you see him, he will look just like a person looks. So he's not this ideal that I have in my head, manifesting himself as this kind of formless spirit kind of deal. So that's not who Maitreya is. Maitreya's energy and love surrounds the whole world, but he himself is just in a physical body. Now, he was not Muhammad, he was not Jesus, he was not Buddha. He was Enoch, which is another question that somebody asked in the Bible. He also manifested through Shankaracharya, Krishna, and so forth. But he was not Krishna or Shankaracharya. He was working through them the same way he worked through Jesus. The Muhammad, actually, Jesus overshadowed him the same way that Maitreya overshadowed Jesus. And so the Quran was written by Jesus. I know most fundamentalist Christians would vehemently disagree with that, but that's the truth. And then the Buddha is a brother of Maitreya, who was actually a part of the first group along with him to become masters of our particular humanity. The Buddha was from the moon chain. Maitreya was from our race, our humanity here now. But anyway, but the Buddha worked through Gautama Buddha in the same way that Maitreya worked through Jesus. And the Buddha is a Christ. He manifests wisdom the same way that Maitreya manifests and embodies love. So they both are Christs on this planet. All right. Let's see. You said Maitreya is on TV where? Well, when Benjamin Creme was alive, he said that Maitreya had given an interview in the United States several times, in Europe, Japan, Russia, Mexico, Brazil, I think Australia, if I'm not mistaken, and other countries, but all over the world, really. Where he's given them since then, unfortunately, I can't tell you per se, but I'm sure in a lot of countries. Next question from Victoria Lee. What you're speaking of is NESARA or JSARA, which is the National Economic Security and Recovery Act or the Global Economic Security and Recovery Act. Actually, no, Victoria, that's not what I'm talking about. What Maitreya and the Masters are advocating in terms of sharing is what happened right after World War II with the Marshall Plan. Okay, so sharing the resources of the excesses of one country and giving it freely to another country that needs it, and as they build up their economy and so forth, they'll have excesses to give back and vice versa and so forth. So the end result of that endeavor, which only lasted a few months or a year or so, is quite astounding. We have more of a peaceful relationship with Western Europe than we have with any other countries on the planet. And then with us. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it's, you look at it globally, the United States trusts those countries better than they trust other countries. In fact, a lot of times you don't even need a visa to go to those countries. You just walk right in there, that kind of thing, and vice versa. So the relationships that we have with those countries was built on the fact that we share the world's resources, we share our country's resources with them. Now, what they're advocating doing is doing this on a global scale. But there was a gentleman named Willy Brandt, who Maitreya actually, not long after he entered London, visited Willy Brandt, who was the former Chancellor of Germany, and asked him if he would come up with this commission. It's called the Brandt Commission, and they ended up writing the Brandt Report. But he suggested to Willy Brandt to get a group of people of various viewpoints, but not middle of the roaders, extreme viewpoints. So it was an extreme communist, extreme capitalist, an extreme socialist, an extreme, right-wing politically, or extreme Democrat or so forth, left-wing, that kind of thing and so forth. And just had this whole panel of people who had different viewpoints, but very extreme different viewpoints, and then would normally have not have gotten along in a given situation, right, except for this one. But Willy Brandt was an extraordinary man, and he actually created a consensus, a true consensus among this group of people of so many varying viewpoints about how to share the world's resources. It's called the Brandt Report. And so you can read it, you can go online and you can read it. It reads very like from one economist to another, but that's what they're talking about doing. So the Nasara and Jasara are all coming from the old ways of trying to solve the problem. And the problem is that the structures are crumbling because the structures were built on greed and competition from the past. And the new structures need to be built because there's a new energy coming in of the energies of Aquarius that are starting to come in more and more every single day. So those structures that were built from the past on greed and competition won't work. So that's the reason why a new structure needs to be built on sharing the world's resources, because every day the system just keeps falling down on itself. So hopefully that helps. All right. Next question. Does Maitreya now or in the future demand worship from humans? Absolutely not. Ever, ever, ever will he ever demand worship from humans. In fact, you will find that the masters do not like devotees whatsoever. They're very detached from that. There was even Benjamin Creme, when people exhibited any kind of devotion toward him, he would smack them. Not physically, but, he would, put them back in their place because he didn't like that, And he said it puts us in the wrong relationship with one another. Maitreya doesn't see himself as above anybody else. He sees us as one among equal sons of God, is what it is. It's just the level of the manifestation of that divinity is really what it is. But there was an example of one of the masters now. He's the master Jual, and his master was the master Kuthumi. The master Kuthumi was the apostle John in the Bible, but he was also Pythagoras from Greece. And anyway, so Kuthumi was his master, and the master Jual was very devoted to his master. For lifetimes he was. And he thought it was his greatest strength. And as loving of a master as the master Kuthumi is, and I mean his future role as in this whole scheme of things will be to awaken the hearts of all mankind. So he's got to have some love in his own heart to be able to do that. But anyway, gave him some feedback that he didn't like, and it was, not only is your devotion not needed and not looked for, but it's the single biggest thing that's holding you back. And it rocked the master Jual to his core. He fell to his knees, cried out, "Why, God, how could you say something like that?" That's, basically he thought that's all he was his devotion to his master, really. And it held him back for lifetimes. But eventually he realized what the master's KH was telling him. You shouldn't be devoted to anybody. Maitreya is only going to want us to find God and find ourselves, that soul within us, within any framework that we have. So if you're a Christian, stay a Christian. If you're a Muslim, stay a Muslim. But he's not desiring devotees at all. In fact, if he wants you to be devoted to anything, it would be probably the ending of hunger on the planet, would be probably the thing that he would tell you to be devoted to. Hope that answers that question. Oh, is Maitreya in any way related to the Lemurians? Well, we all are, because that was the first great civilization on this planet that humanity formed, and then became the Atlanteans, and then we're moving out of that, but we still are very influenced by the work and what the Atlanteans did, because we're still focused on the emotional astral body, if that makes any sense. So we are both kind of in that that whole thing. Anyway, is there a relationship between Samyaza and his watchers from the book of Enoch? I don't know. But Enoch was actually an earlier incarnation of Maitreya. Enoch appeared in the Old Testament, if that helps it at all. Let's see, what else? Why do you believe that Maitreya is the Christ, and what if you discover he is the enemy of the Christ? Well, why do I believe Maitreya is the Christ? Upon first reading about Maitreya, what really resonated with me was his priorities, okay, which above all is the establishment of peace, and then saving our environment, right? Now those are just ideas, right? Very lofty ideas, but they're just ideas. When I read a little further, what really stuck in my heart was the solution that Maitreya gave for peace. Without sharing, there could be no justice. Without justice, there could be no peace. And without peace, there could be no future. And then I realized, I was like, wow, I do think if we did that, that could create peace. I mean, at the time, I didn't know for sure. I didn't know anything about this. I didn't have as much of a conviction about this material as I do now. But at the same time, I was like, I could kind of get that. And I thought about that for days. But it leads me to something that happened to me when I was in high school, and why it resonated with me so much, right? About the ending of hunger, and how and why it's so important, okay? When I grew up in South Carolina, which was in a middle-class family in the suburbs of South Carolina and so forth. We weren't rich, weren't poor, but we had enough, but it is what it is. We didn't go jet setting out everywhere, but I had a pretty decent life as a kid. I followed my father to El Paso, Texas, on a business trip one time. My parents were divorced, and so my dad lived in St. Louis, and I traveled to St. Louis every summer to see my dad, and he had to go to El Paso, so I was like, shoot, I'll go with you. So we drove to El Paso. And in the process of traveling to El Paso, I saw poverty, and abject poverty, in a way that I had not seen growing up in middle-class South Carolina. And there were kids begging on the street. They would come right up to your door when you're at the light. You're leaving the restaurant. Please, sir, please give me food, give me money, whatever it is. And it really started to tear up my heart. That was one thing, right? And I was in it, and I had, like I said, I'd never seen that kind of thing before. And then my dad and I took a walking trip into Ciudad Juarez. We walked in there, and I saw life in a way that I had never seen before. But there was one time during this few days that I was in El Paso that my dad and I drove to kind of outside the city, and I wanted to see the Rio Grande River. So we drove somewhere, I can't remember where it was, and my dad kind of went one way and I went another way, and I went down to the river. And I'm looking at this river, and the Rio Grande River, if you don't know, is what separates Mexico, which is a very poor country, from the United States, which is obviously one of the richest countries, if not the richest country in the planet, right? And it's just this thin little river. And I was looking at it, and that river, and it didn't look very deep at all. It looked like it was just a few inches in some spots. And it was maybe 50 feet from shore to shore, right? And so I'm looking at this river, and then I kind of look up, and there's a hill, and there's a shanty town that's right there. And by shanty town, I mean no permanent construction in this town. It was all just wood. Leaning against the wood was a tin, what we would consider a tin roof to be, and that was it. It looked like tents, kind of thing. No electricity, no paved roads. I mean, the roads were just there, and you could see some tire tracks, and that was about it. And as I'm looking at this little town, and it's starting to get a little dusky because it was about 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the summertime, I'm noticing that there's no electricity in this town. And right when I think this young boy comes out of this little shanty and comes down to the edge of the river. Now, this young boy was wearing nothing but dirty, ripped pants, no shoes, no shirt, dirt all over his face, hair dirty, everything like this. He's looking at me. He didn't know this, but we had just left a very nice restaurant in El Paso, so I was full. He probably didn't have food that day or whatever. And I'm looking at him, and I don't smile at him. I don't wave to him. He doesn't wave to me, and I'm just looking at him. And then I start thinking to myself, the only thing that's separating my life from him is this little thin little river. And the only thing that's keeping him from living my life is this little river. So and then, I look back behind me, and the lights in El Paso are already starting to come on in these buildings. So he's seeing this metropolitan city, with all these lights and buildings and wondering God knows what. And I'm looking at his poor little shanty town. And I realized, the only thing that's separating my life from him is this little river, right? So when I started reading about sharing the world's resources and, that kind of thing, so everyone can have food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, and education, my first thought actually was about this boy. And I was like, I want him to have that life. Why couldn't he have the life that I have? Except for the fact that he was born on the other side of the river. You know what I mean? So I wanted it for him. I wanted him to have food. And I didn't know what happened to the young boy. I didn't know if he's still alive or dead or whatever, but I wanted him to have it. And so it made sense to me. And it was what I wanted too. And then the second reason why is my own personal experiences with Maitreya. Anything from falling off a ladder and almost killing myself, but yet getting up off the pavement without a scratch or a bump or a bruise or anything, to a payphone message that, he wrote the same thing that I was writing basically I was writing in Japan. He wrote it on a payphone message here in the States, and I didn't tell anybody this. So only somebody at the stature of a Christ or a master, I guess, could do, and so it's not something that, and even the times that I met Maitreya in person, the wisdom and the energy of what he's saying and the love behind what he was saying, although he never claimed to be Maitreya, he never claimed to be the Christ, it was just, he was there to teach me something. The wisdom behind what he's saying it was irrefutable. It was irrefutable. And yet I took it for myself, and I've grown from it in a way that I don't think I could have if it wasn't coming from somebody like Maitreya. Then the third reason is actually Benjamin Creme himself. I first met Benjamin Creme in 1997 in San Francisco at a conference that they put on, and he would fly to the United States every year, give a few lectures, and then at the end of his tour, he would do a conference. And if you were invited to go, you could go and all that kind of stuff. So I was lucky enough to go, and I got a chance to get to know Benjamin Creme on a personal level. I wasn't the closest with him, but I wasn't I got a chance to know him, and I even drove him around here a couple times when he was here in Atlanta and got to know who he was. And I will say this about Benjamin Creme. He was exactly the same off stage and off camera and off mic that he was on stage. And he started his day early and ended his day really, really late and did not stop or rest the whole time. He was working the whole time. But he did it with such joy, was he the easiest person to take? No. There was times where he said things that really offended and hurt my feelings. But yet when I stepped back and looked at it over the years that he said it to me, I looked at it in a different way, and I was like, wow, he's actually right. And so, but at the time it really stung, so he wasn't this gushy, sweet guy, he was a tough cookie, but he was a tough cookie with a heart of gold, and he never once changed. And if you talk to anybody that knew him the same way that I knew him, they'll tell you the exact same thing about him. He never once changed his demeanor at all. So, and then he talked about his own experiences with his master, and it also kind of, made it more real for me in that way. And then I think lastly, it's, coming also from reading Benjamin Creme's master's articles and the wisdom and how enlightened they are, but yet very simple, and when he talks about something, he just adds a depth to it that I can't explain. You have to really read it, and that's why I like reading his messages at the end. I don't do them as much justice as if you read it yourself, but I know a lot of people don't have his books, so just hopefully it'll encourage people to go out and seek out his books, if that makes any sense. That's my intention for doing it. But, it's the wisdom behind his words, the simplicity behind it. But, most people fail to realize or remember that the Bible was written by hundreds of people over thousands of years. And just because it's written in the Bible does not mean it comes from the Word of God. I don't think that Jesus went around Palestine saying he was the only true Son of God. I think he saw himself as the Son of Man or a teacher, but I don't think he saw it. I think that was all written in there after he had died by men. Just like Maitreya says, that's a man-made term, and, a lot of what's in the Bible should be taken as symbolic, and not literally, right? Now, if you look at Maitreya's priorities and what Jesus talked about, they really are identical because they're coming from the same source. And so it's all about us living together as one family. Jesus talked about that, right? But, even he said to his disciples one time, he goes, when I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was in prison, you came and visited me. When I was hungry, you gave me food. And what did his disciples ask? When did we visit you in prison? When did we give you something to drink? When did we give you food? What was his response? Do you remember? It was, if you did it to somebody else, you've done it to me. And the wisdom and the love that is here for our asking for help through Maitreya and Jesus and these other masters, we don't know yet what is available to us. But when you see Maitreya, when you experience the love and the wisdom of what he's talking about, you'll understand why I've come to the conclusion that I've come to. But it's more important, whoever wrote this, asked this question. Two things. It's more important to look at his priorities than the fact that I think he's the Christ. And it's also more important to come to your own conclusions about Maitreya, not get it from me or Benjamin Creme or somebody else. But so many people in every aspect of their life will take something that's really, really good for them and throw it out because of one thing. You know what I'm saying? For instance, I'm on a date, right? A guy might be sitting with a woman who might be the best thing that ever happened to him, or vice versa. It might be a woman to a guy, right? And there's 99 things that they absolutely adore about this person, but then they say one thing, or they admit one thing, or do one thing, and then they take it and they just throw that whole person out. And then they find somebody else that's probably 99% bad for them and 1% good, and they're like, that's the love of my life, right? And people have done it against the church. I mean, there's so many truths in the Bible that even if you didn't believe that Jesus was who the Christians think Jesus is, that could change your life and help you out and make you a better person, right? But yeah, they throw the whole thing out because they're turned off by what people who are religious say. And it's the same thing for this, information. People, there's so many truths to what Benjamin Creme and Maitreya and Benjamin Creme's master are saying, but people throw it right out because of the fact that they don't believe Maitreya is the Christ. It doesn't matter to Maitreya either way whether you believe he's the Christ or not. It does not matter to him. He doesn't even want to be known as the Christ. He just wants to be known as a teacher. He says those are all man-made terms. So don't look to me for that. Look to me as a teacher. That's clear. He said that's closer to the mark. So he's not asking people to change their beliefs. He's not asking people to follow him. He's not asking people to worship him. He sees us himself as one among equal sons of God. And it's only the level of manifestation of that divinity really is the difference. But that's it. So when you see Maitreya, you will know what I'm talking about. Now, I don't think I'll ever discover that he's the enemy of Christ, like I said, because his priorities are right in line with what Jesus said. So, but if I did discover he was the enemy of the Christ, I give you full well permission to kick me in the nuts as hard as you can. But like I said, I don't ever see that happening. But anyway, I hope I answered these questions, and I think I got to all of them. I think I'll have to go back and look at it and make sure. But anyway, I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to talking to you again in future videos. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.